Hello everyone, and today we're going to be doing one of you guys' favorite videos. It's going to be a tier list video heading into Silver Tempest. Now these are my early predictions on where I think decks are going to fall. Tier 1, 1.5, 2, 3, and don't play this. If it's generally between 1 and 2, I think it's a very playable deck. 1 being the decks that you gotta beat, you gotta deal with. 2 being the decks, or like 1.5 being, it's close but it has a couple of bad matchups to the tier 1 decks. And then tier 2 being like, well, this is good, but you fold to a couple decks as well. And then tier 3 is like, you got to get really lucky to do well. But this is my tier list video for Silver Tempest. And so what I'm doing also is revamping my content a little bit, guys, because I know I do a lot of discussion style competitive videos. So to add on to that, I'm going to try to do gameplay videos with deck lists. So let me know in the comments below if that's something that'd be interesting to you. Whether it be on PTCG or PTCG Live, I will try to record some more gameplay videos with deck list if that is something you guys are interested in. I know in the past there's not been much interest in that kind of stuff, but with PTCG Live being almost unanimously going to happen at the end of the year, I can make cards much easier without having to train an arm and a leg on PTCGO. So, without further ado, let's jump into my tier list. So, Reggie Drago, I'm going to go ahead and put it into tier 2 because I don't think Reggie Drago is a tier 1 deck yet because I don't know how you can fit everything you want to fit into one deck efficiently. But I think like if you play something like Reggie Drago Arceus or Reggie Drago, I don't know. I don't know how I would build it exactly, but I think Reggie Drago as a whole could be a really strong concept and is a really strong deck if you can put it together correctly. But I don't think it'll be the most consistent, or like I think maybe you pull off the combo that you're trying to pull off 6 out of every 10 games, maybe even like 5 out of every 10 games, which isn't very high odds for trying to win a tournament or even like go deep in a tournament, but it'd be a lot of fun to play. I think Lugia V-Star is our new Overlord. This card is going to be one of the big beaters in the format that jumps right into Palkia and like the power levels of Palkia and the power levels of what like Mew had as soon as they came out, where like they immediately made an impact on the format. Lugia, Palkia, Mew, like those 3 decks like immediately came in, immediately did something, and I think Lugia falls into that category as well, where like the engine itself is so easy, so self-explanatory to pull off. It's the V-Star power is super easy. The deck construction is just a lot of big things in one deck, and then it's just kind of getting the list down to iron it out exactly how you want it to deal with certain things, and then you kind of just go from there. I think Arc Gudra falls into tier 1.5 because while Arc Gudra is still very strong, it did just win a big regional championship in Salt Lake City, Utah. So it has to be, like, some credit has to be put on its name. But at the end of the day, it's still a little bit inconsistent because of what it entails and like how the engine works. But Starbirth is a very good attack. Starbirth is a very good V-Star power, and so is Moisture Star. Both of these cards are very, very good in their own right. But I think at the end of the day, the deck sometimes falls to its own inconsistencies, and that's what kind of puts it a little bit below everybody else. Arcantelion goes into tier 2 as well. I think Arceus decks will typically not fall below tier 2 because of Starbirth and how powerful it is. And while Arcantelion is one of those decks that can get you everything you need, every piece you need every turn, because Inteleon will get you everything, the problem is space. You're putting all these cards into this Arceus deck to just try to stay alive, but you're not actually progressing the game state that much. Like at most, you're dealing 200 damage. Maybe if you play Choice Belt Zigzagoon, you can go up to 240, but you're not actually putting pressure on a lot of these decks like Giratina, Palkia, Mew, Lugia. Now, all these 4 decks can one-shot you in this current format, so I don't really know what you're supposed to do when that happens to you. So I think that's the biggest issue with a deck like this. Palkia goes into S tier for me, or like tier 1. I think this Palkia has to be paired with Inteleon. I don't think Kyrie and Palkia is separate here, but Palkia Inteleon is probably still a tier 1 deck. I think it's one of the most powerful decks in this format, and I think like that 57 cards of the shell that has been fleshed out since NAIC will continue to be the norm until rotation happens and we lose the Inteleon engine, because that 57 cards has been so powerful, it's been so consistent at getting the job done that most decks going second against Palkia are always fearful for their attackers on the bench. Palkia can almost always reliably take that 2 prizes if they go first and have a decent setup with their cross switchers, their Iridas, all those combos, so I think it falls into tier 1. Regigigas falls into tier 1.5 because I think while Regigigas is still a very, very strong deck, and we saw 3 place in top 8 of Salt Lake City, it is not a very consistent deck and has Regi hands, as we like to call them. But I do think Regigigas gets another good matchup in the form of Lugia. Yes, I think Lugia will end up playing Dunsparce, so it's a little bit more difficult to kind of deal with that matchup, but you are getting some of these better matchups where you can use cards like your Regice a little bit better, and your typings are going to work out a lot better in your favor. I just think Reggie's overall is just like a very powerful pick into this very top heavy 2 prize meta where like you have some time to buy if your deck actually sets up. I think Arc Beedrill will fall into tier 2 as well, just because I think while Arc Beedrill is powerful, and I think Beedrill does counter Lugia super well. You're more prevalent to Palkia and Mew if they go back to playing Fusion Strike energies. So I'm not 100% sure that Arc Beedrill is the correct play moving forward, but I think that Beedrill as a card could be really good in some capacity. I don't know where it would kind of fit in. I'd put Blissey Miltank in tier 3, just because I think Blissey Miltank, while it did get finals at regionals, I think it's still a very high rolly deck. You got to have a lot of things go your way. I did play a little bit of Blissey Miltank after it got that second place, and the Mew matchup doesn't feel great. RCS doesn't feel great either if you don't, set up super early. Giratina feels really, really scary, and I don't like having really bad matchups into some of those decks like that. Like I think Giratina especially, and Palkia can even roll you if they actually set up properly. And now you're getting worse matchup in the form of Lugia, where they can just get into their big Aerostar and start one-shotting you, and then if you go into your Miltank, well, they've got the Archeops that can also just attack into you, or another one of their one-prize attackers that they might have, like a Zard or something like that. I'm going to put Eternatus into the don't play tier because I think Eternatus, even with Weezing, just feels really bad because Weezing is probably the only good part of that deck, and the Eternatus is just kind of there to give you a finisher. But at that point, like, why are you just playing like a Weezing control, like Weezing Ariados, or like Weezing Hammers, plus like Galar Mines or something, like like Hisuian Sneasler, like stuff like that. But I think the Eternatus is just a bait in that kind of deck because it eats up so much space. Even though you get 4 Crobats, now you have like, even if you play like a 3/3 Eternatus, now you have 7 bad starters in your deck compared to the Weezing line. So I think, yeah. Dialga also goes into my don't play tier because I think with the Comfy engine and the Lost Zone engine, Dialga has fallen in popularity, or like fallen in like consistency, because you need to use those Mews and all that stuff was really good for the deck. But the problem also, I think, therein lies that every other deck is gotten better. So like Chrono Star itself is not doing enough to win you games in this like in this vein. Like Chrono Star is like the one thing that would just kind of win Dialga the game sometimes, but being able to V-Star there, and then what do you do next turn? You're just taking a little bit, so that, like Xander's Bennett version was pretty cool, but besides that, I think it's pretty mid. Arc Duraludon goes into tier 2. I think Arc Duraludon does gain a little bit of popularity because Lugia should be a really good matchup for him. Mew should be a really good matchup for this deck as well, but the problem therein always lies that, not everything works as perfectly as you want it to, because Lugia does play like Yveltal Amazing Rare or like cards like that to one-shot your Duraludon out of nowhere, and all of a sudden the game gets really hard. So I think Duraludon does rise in popularity because all these special energy decks. You have a really good Reggie matchup, but Reggie's been playing Path recently, so if they go Path Regice, then you're just in a lot of danger off the bat. So yeah, that's how I look at it. Arc Pika, I'm still going to put, I don't know, I think this is one of the few decks that goes into tier 3, because even though Pika can one-shot Lugia and can one-shot Palkia, I think it takes a huge beating from a lot of the cards that can go into Lugia or Palkia still. Like, I don't even think your Palkia matchup is necessarily that good. I never thought it was. And so I think Lugia can also capitalize. Like, you're going to put the Dunsparce down. They're going to have to boss the Dunsparce. At that point, their Arceus is probably already dead because of Lugia. And so if they boss and kill with the Pikachu, then you bring up this Lugia, just swing in hard. Or you bring up the Yveltal and just one-shot with the... Because I think it goes through all effects. But either way, I think, like, Lugias can build their deck to kind of deal with Pikas. And I'm not entirely sold on Pika's consistency or like what it brings to the table. Like, it has to play like a third attacker, maybe Tina, maybe the Espeon VMAX, like we saw in the James Steels' list. I think like Espeon VMAX could make the deck really good, but I think having to deal with Tina, Palkia, Lugia, and Mew, like, there's too many things you have to worry about. I think Mew goes into tier 1 because now the Fusion Strike build also gets even better with the Forest Steel Stone. And Serena is a card that also makes the other version pretty good. So now Mew has all these like fun new tools that it didn't really need because the DTE version was already very oppressive and good as it is. But now it gets a little bit, a couple new friends, and it gets better. So I really like that Mew is powerful still. Palkia Kyurem I'm going to put into tier 1.5 because it is a very powerful deck still. It's just the problem is that I think it has a fine Lugia matchup because you do get to one-shot Lugia back in return. But Palkia Kyurem has always had like a slight consistency issues across the board, but it is a very linear, very straightforward, very powerful deck, and that's what I really like about it. I think that's why it will stay in this tier for the duration of its career. The engine is very straightforward. You've got the Iridas, you've got the VIP passes, you've got like all of these cards that kind of just make sense in this deck. And I don't think Lugia is necessarily like a bad matchup off the rip if you think about it. I think it's a fine matchup. It's just a big slugfest. And it just comes down to who goes first, who gets a better setup, who can start taking those one-shots quicker. And Lugia will have a more difficult time taking one-shots on Kyurem. So Lost Box goes into 1.5 for me as well, because I think Lost Box is one of those decks that is very difficult to play. And I think sometimes you pitch the wrong cards in the wrong order, and all of a sudden the game can kind of just end, and you have to think really, really hard. There's a lot of times where if you lose a game 1, you're probably never finishing the set, and that's something that I don't really like about this deck. Yeah, so I just don't think Lost boxes for everyone. I'm going to put control into tier 3 because I don't really know what goes into control right now. I do think control, while it can perform very, very well, I think all the top decks might have an answer to it. But I might be pleasantly surprised. I think Mewtwo Union specifically is what I'm thinking about. I think everything can actually deal with it. But maybe if there's a different version of control that I'm missing, it could really dazzle me. I would put Rotom V-Star in tier 3 because I think Rotom V-Star actually can see play. I saw some of the Japanese lists that actually looked very cool. And I would put some effort into Rotom V-Star because I think this card can actually put some damage on the board, do something. It has 2 good typings amongst the top table cards. I think it can play into RCS pretty well as well. But I just think the problem is going to come down to how consistently can you get those tools into the discard, into the lost zone, like whatever, and how consistent, like how accurately can this deck actually do what it wants to do. I think that's why it becomes a tier 3 deck. But it is one of those decks that I really think has some potential, and I want to try it out because it has like a lot of cards that make sense, a lot of synergy that makes sense. So it should, in theory, be playable, which I want to try. Superior, I'm going to put in a don't play this because I think it is a trap. I think at the end of the day, decks like this are always usually like really alluring and you're like, oh my god, the damage, the numbers, they make sense. But the V-Star attack is not that great. The attack itself is like okay numbers. I think it can get you to 2 shots, but 2-shotting in this format where everything is 1-shotting doesn't feel great if your secondary attack is not better. And I think the V-Star attack being as bad as it is, in my opinion, makes this unplayable. I'll put Arctina in tier 2 because I think Arctina also, again, same principle, Starbirth into the or even if you don't Starbirth, you just set up your Tina, start swinging. I guess you're never Star Requieming. I feel like that's something that you don't really do with this deck. So you just go into the RCS, get your Starbirth going, set up a bunch of energies on the board, get the Arc, get a Tina ready to start hitting and doing 280s and 1-shotting. And the principle of the deck is very simple, and I think it's very, very strong. Tina, Lost Zone Engine goes into tier 1 for me. And I think that's just because this deck is just so innately powerful. With the Lost Zone Engine, the options you can put in the deck, Cramorant, the Colress's Experiments, the Giratina, like all these cards are so inherently powerful that I really enjoy what the deck brings to the table, and I think this is one of my favorite decks in the format, with this just sheer firepower of what Giratina V-Star can do. It's going to force Lugia to kind of play a little bit differently, play those V-Guard energies, and Star Requiem can still rip through these big attackers with not even batting an eye, which is, I think, something crazy and something very important to observe. I want to put Urshi in tier 2 because I think there is a world where this deck can be good with... actually, it's going to go into tier 3 because I think Lugia does have resistance, and that's one bad matchup immediately. Mew is a terrible matchup, and I think Giratina is not the best either. Like, all the top 4 tier 1 decks are bad for you, in my opinion. And so you have to really, like, pull the rug out from under someone, get the Thornton combos, get the Metachamp combos. Maybe the Earth Seal Stone will do something for the deck, but I think even the Earth Seal Stone might not be able to, like, recover this entirely. You have to still deal with, like, every deck plays Manaphy except for... I guess, Mew. Like, all these decks will play Manaphy. Like, Manaphy is just something really difficult to deal with. And so, I think Urshi, while it's really cute and fun, I don't think can hold a candle to these guys. I'm going to put... I'll put Vikavolt in tier 2 because you do get the Forest Seal Stone and the Aleki does give you boosted damage. And Vikavolt does set up an item lock, so it could stick your opponent with weird hands. You could stick your opponent in a place where they can't play the game, and that is something I do really like. So maybe this works out in a way where the deck is actually very good, valuable, but I think it's one of those Copium decks where, like, yes, you have good typing into here. I think you can stick Mew pretty easily if they're playing heavy items. And Lost Box should theoretically be okay, but the problem is all of these matchups are theoretically okay, but then Vikavolt doesn't establish the lock, and all of a sudden you've lost the game. Like with a lot of these decks, you miss lock for 1 turn going second, you lose the game. And that's not, like, if you miss lock for 1 turn going second, Lugia blows you up, Palkia blows you up, Mew blows you up, Giratina blows you up. Their boards are set up. You can't even path money them out of the game a lot of the time because their boards are already established and you're doing such little damage to them that it's not actually doing, even with the Regieleki VMAX, you're doing so little damage to them that you're not winning the game. Last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and put Zoroark in tier 3 because I think even though Zoroark had a big presence in the past couple tournaments, it did not convert very well. I think Hisuian Zoroark has been one of those decks that has been showing up in numbers, performing below average, below expected. Like if a deck is showing up in that much popularity, a deck should be able to perform and put itself into the top 8. I've personally not liked the deck as much because it's so linear, and if you don't draw the right cards in the right order, that's kind of what loses you the game. It's not like it's not powerful. I think the deck is insanely powerful. The problem is just you have to draw the right cards in the right order, and the moment that doesn't happen, you have lost the game. And that's really where my problem lies with the deck. So that is my tier list for right now with this Lost Origin format, or not Silver Tempest format. I'll be prepared to eat my words. I have like 5 regionals and like an IC in this format, so I will be playing this format for quite a while. I hope you guys enjoyed this content. Let me know what kind of deck gameplay videos and stuff you'd like to see in the comments below, because I will start catering myself to doing some gameplay videos once again. I know it's something that I haven't done in a really long time, and I've been putting it off. But I've got a spark in me. I've got a spark to make content. I want to help you guys learn and kind of understand some of these decks as we're moving forward. So please, yeah, I hope you guys give me some suggestions. I hope you guys enjoy the content. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.